conversation, all you need to do is head over to CBC News' Facebook page. That's at facebook.com/CBC News. You can leave your comments or questions rather, in the comments section, and we're going to use that to help form the discussion. And we are hoping to hear from you no matter how you travel the streets. Well, that said, we also want to show you this new poll. This is from Angus Reid, and it suggests Canadians seem pretty split on who's at fault for conflict on the roads. The results are predictable. Cyclists tend to blame drivers. Drivers point the finger at cyclists. And the split is also apparent between younger and older Canadians as well. But does assigning blame get us any closer to a solution? Is the debate more about behavior and enforcing the rules, or is it about proper infrastructure? Well, we're coming up, we're going to speak to two people. One of them is Denzil Minnan-Wong, who is a city councillor in the city of Toronto. But we're also going to reach out to the mayor of Victoria, Lisa Helps, although now I'm hearing that we're having some technical issues. So stand by, we're going to have that discussion in a moment. But right now we're going to turn our attentions to another story that we're following for you. And that has to do with the scorching weather on this Canada Day weekend.
It's not going to change our plans at all.
No?
We're here from Michigan, so we're going to enjoy every minute.
Deb Whitus has even bought a new purse to do double duty.
We always have a lot. Bought a new purse that carries two waters, one on each side.
But even as the stage goes up, organizers of the big event say there is such a thing as too hot.
Security of everybody is what's paramount for us.
Dominic Tessier with Canadian Heritage says a cancellation is unlikely, but
We try to avoid canceling, but it is a possibility.
But right now, the party is on, and they're making sure some of last year's bottlenecks don't become a hazard.
Parliamentary Protective Services, which is our security partner that takes care of security on the Hill, have also put some measures into place in order to ensure that things go faster this year.
You'll find a paramedic station at that security lineup to get onto Parliament Hill.
I can tell you we learned a lot from last year. So these are our new ATV ambulances.
Marc-Antoine Deschamps says the new vehicles will come in handy.
So it comes with like an ambulance with lights, with a siren, and it's meant to go through crowd and go places our ambulances cannot go.
They'll be fitted with equipment and stretchers and...
Oh yeah, we'll make sure that all our vehicles and all our first aid stations are well stocked with water.
And despite the increased number of emergency personnel out on Canada Day, public health officials hope folks take precautions and watch for signs they're in trouble.
So you really want to take that serious. So when you start to feel sick to your stomach, get into that shade, find air conditioning, drink some more. If it gets really bad, you want to reach out to the paramedics that are going to be all around downtown, or if you need to, call 911.
And that report from Armand Pfeffer in Ottawa. Well, plans for vehicle ferry service from Saint-Pierre and Miquelon to Fortune, Newfoundland have now hit a dead end. The French territory spending millions of dollars on two new boats able to handle more than walk-on traffic. But now there is a hitch. And for details, we turn to Chris O'Neill-Yates.
Saint-Pierre-Miquelon is a taste of France right on Newfoundland's doorstep. The ferry crossing between Fortune, Newfoundland to right here in Saint-Pierre is roughly 1 hour. So just in time for the tourist season this year, Saint-Pierre-Miquelon inaugurated two brand new vessels at a cost of $25 million each. The idea was that for the first time in history, passengers would be able to take their cars and vehicles and drive on one side and drive off the other, because traditionally they've only been able to accommodate walk-on passengers. And the idea was to enhance the business relationship and the close connections that Saint-Pierre-Miquelon has enjoyed with Newfoundland, and to develop tourism. But there's been a problem with that. On the Fortune side, the ferry dock is not ready, meaning that it can't accommodate cars to drive onto these brand new ferries. So every time they leave the dock, either here or Saint-Pierre, these car decks are empty because Fortune doesn't have the money to finish its dock. That's a problem that the president of Saint-Pierre-Miquelon, Stéphane Lenormand, has been grappling with over the last couple of years.
Our ferry strategy is to attract tourists who will stay here for 4 or 5 days with their recreational vehicles or their tents. And naturally, from an economic point of view, that means much more to our economy than tourists who come here for a day or two.
Understandably, the mayor of Fortune is equally frustrated by this situation. He'd love to have traffic from St. Pierre able to roll off the ferry over in Fortune.
I know there are negotiations still ongoing, but, you know, it's been ongoing too long. The ferry is running.
So right now it's a waiting game to see if Fortune can come up with $1.5 million it needs to finish the dock so that cars can drive on. If not, the vast tourism and business potential of these brand new ferries will remain, at least for now, untapped. Chris O'Neill-Yates, CBC News, Saint-Pierre-Miquelon.
Well, now back to the panel discussion that we promised to you, having to do with bike safety on streets across this country. We now know that the streets are certainly becoming more and more congested. Many people very worried by the number of cyclists who are being killed on the roads. But does assigning blame get us any closer to the solution? Is the debate more about behavior and enforcing the rules, or is it about proper infrastructure? With that, I want to invite two guests to the program who have both been deeply involved in those debates in their respective cities. Lisa Helps is the mayor of Victoria. She joins us right now from the BC capital. And Denzil Minnan-Wong is a longtime Toronto City Councillor. He joins us near the downtown bike network in Toronto. So thank you for the two of you for joining us. At least I'm going to begin with you because, you know, both of you have worked in your own cities under different conditions to create separated bike lanes. Many people point to those as the solution. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. If there is safe infrastructure, people who are currently driving their cars, who would get on their bikes if it were safer, we're starting to see here in Victoria, they're using this new infrastructure. So it's absolutely the answer to creating safety on the roads.
Denzil, what do you say to that? Do you think it is about creating an expanded, in Toronto's case, an expanded network for bikes to be separated from the other road users like cars?
Well, in Toronto, we've had some we've had a pretty bad time in the last year in terms of the number of deaths we've had on our roads, and so we're trying to get our heads around what the proper solution is in terms of addressing this particular issue. Bike lanes, I think, or changing the physical infrastructure on our roads is part of the solution, but I think there are broader issues that need to be addressed as well.
What do you mean by that?
Well, firstly, I think, you know, within the Toronto context, I can't speak for Victoria or anywhere else in the country. I think we have to understand better why. Why are these deaths happening? And so I'll take a page from what my mayor, John Tory, said. He said people aren't as considerate as they used to be. And so we have to understand why all three users of the road, pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers, why is it that these deaths are happening, and who contributes to this? What type of behavioral attributes have happened over the last number of years to see such a spike? Once we get that data in and we can do that research, we can start to fashion a proper and comprehensive solution.
Well, let me pick up on that point, Denzil, because you talk about behavior, and I do want to play here for you a clip from a former cyclist who says that he used to ride but has now thought about it twice. Take a listen to what he has to say.
I used to bike, and I know that I never paid attention to any rules. Never. I roll through stop signs, stop lights. It didn't matter what the rules were, that's what I would do, and I see a lot of that going on. So I know that where we are going, but I also know that the cyclists have to take a lot of responsibility too.
Lisa, what do you say to that? You know, bike lanes have been the go-to solution for a lot of people, but as we heard from Councillor Minnan-Wong in Toronto and that former bike network user, that a lot of it has to do with behavior, and some of that behavior is cyclists' bad behavior on the roads.
Absolutely. Everybody who uses the roads and the sidewalks, whether a pedestrian, someone on a bicycle, or a car, absolutely needs to follow the rules of the road 100%. And if people follow the rules of the road, that does take away a lot of the possibility of conflict. So I completely agree with that. And at the same time, following the rules of the road isn't enough if we don't have the separated infrastructure, because that really is what keeps people safe. Here in the bike lanes that we're standing by right here in Victoria, cars actually cannot physically get into the lanes, and so it's that little bit of extra protection that's needed. But absolutely, everybody following the rules of the road and everybody paying attention is what will make a successful city, and that Vision Zero where no one's getting killed no matter what mode they're using.
And what do you say to that, Denzil? Because there will be people that hear what you're saying about behavior, but when you talk about a road like Toronto, Vancouver, or one in Montreal, these are roads that are very, very busy, and with or without behavior improving, separated bike lanes is an insurance that people will not be killed. What do you say to that?
Well, I think we also have to have a conversation about pedestrians on the roads, because a lot of them have been hurt as well, and what do we do about that? I think there are other pieces that we should consider. So the role of technology in cycling and the pedestrians. So, people have they text in their cars, which is a huge problem. Are cyclists putting themselves at risk when they have their earbuds in their ears? Pedestrians who aren't paying attention because they're texting or they're not paying attention when they're crossing the street. There are a lot of elements here that we have to consider. Certainly bike lanes are something that we'd like to do, but in the city of Toronto, congestion's a real problem, and when you start to take out that capacity, you are making it harder and harder to get around the city of Toronto, and congestion is a real concern.
Mm-hmm. Is congestion being a real concern? Lisa, what do you think when you hear that?
Well, what I think and what I know and what we know from other cities is when you build a complete network that's safe for people of all ages and abilities, car congestion actually starts to go down. So the research that we've been drawing on, about 60% of people would cycle, would get out of their cars if it was safe for them to do so. So what we're doing here as quickly as possible is building what's called a minimum grid so that we connect people from the places they live to the places they work to the places their kids go to ballet lessons or childcare, so that people can get from A to B to C to D safely. And what that actually does over time, the research shows, is it decreases car congestion, because those people who can cycle but don't right now actually start to choose
Lisa, let me jump in.
time.
Lisa, let me jump in. Sorry, we're running out of time here on News Network, but we're going to continue the conversation on Facebook. News Network, stay with us. The conversation does continue on Facebook for those who want to continue to listen. And as promised, we continue the conversation right now on Facebook. Lisa, sorry to have cut you off there. Can close out your thoughts there about the shared road space.
Right. So what I was saying is that when you have a complete network, people start to use that instead of taking their cars. And, my acupuncturist is a perfect example. She's got 2 young kids. They come downtown every day. And before we built this 4th Street corridor here behind us, she would take her 2 kids in the car every day and take them downtown. Once we built this lane, which pretty much connects her safely to her house, she bought a bike that she can put her 2 kids on the back of, and every day she bikes downtown with her kids. So that's one less car congesting the roads of Victoria.
Denzil, as we have this conversation, I do wonder how much of this is about money, though, because we're focusing on behaviors. But if all the money in the world was there to build a separated bike lane and therefore make sure that bike users are safe and take congestion off of roads and sidewalks, would that not help? Is this just an issue of money?
No, I think it's there are a number of elements to consider. One thing to consider is I don't believe you can put separated bike lanes in the city of Toronto on every single street. The other thing to take into consideration as well is the number of people who are driving has increased. It will continue to increase for the foreseeable future all across the country. There have been some studies out of Queen's University. One thing for sure is there are going to be more car drivers, and so we have to address that particular issue. And so taking out more capacity is not the solution for getting cities moving.
I want to bring in some questions here, because being on Facebook, we have people asking questions of the two of you right now. And I'm going to begin with Murray Etherington, because he asked the following question. He says, licensing cyclists requiring tests and fees would help. Cars pay fees, why not bicycles? Testing would ensure good behavior. Do you think that is something that we should be considering? We test drivers, why not cyclists, Lisa?
Sure. I think cycling education is really, really important. And we do have a society here in Victoria called Bike to Work Week Society. We also have people that are starting businesses teaching bike lessons. So absolutely, cycling education is important. As cities, we have enough on our plates. We're not going to license cyclists. Here in British Columbia, cars are licensed by the provincial body ICBC. So if provincial government wants to license cyclists, fill their boots, that's fine. But from our point of view, it's not something the city's going to take on. But we absolutely are going to do education and support educational efforts. When we opened our new bike lanes here, we actually took people on tours so they learn how to use the network. So absolutely agree, education's important, and training.
Education, but you draw the line at licensing. What do you think, Denzil?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to encourage is active transportation. So if we can get people out exercising, that's a great thing. You don't want a licensing system that's going to discourage, for example, kids from learning how to ride bikes. But by the same token, at some point in time, and what studies in Toronto have found is that the costs are fairly prohibitive, but we might have to look beyond that. Because if there is an enforcement problem, one of the ways to enforce the law is to have an identification system. So that might be something that we might have to revisit down the road.
So perhaps identification, if not licensing altogether. I want to bring in another question here. This is from Brandon Slade, who says on YouTube, should bikes be allowed to be on the road if there are no bike lanes? Lisa, what do you think?
Should bikes be allowed to be on the road if there are no bike lanes?
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, my answer is yes, because people riding bikes have, along with pedestrians, the lightest impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We need more people taking transit, we need more people on bikes, and we need more people walking. So I think cyclists do take their life in their hand when they're sharing roads with cars, but of course they should be allowed on the road because they're the lightest impact, along with pedestrians, the lightest impact in terms of climate change, and that's certainly part of the reason we're building out our network here.
Denzil, what do you think? And as I ask you the question, I want to paint a picture for people outside Toronto, because in Toronto there are bike lanes on 3 major roads closer to the business area of Toronto. We're talking about Richmond as well as Adelaide and King Street, but people are riding their bikes on roads even without those bike lanes. What do you think? Should bikes be allowed on roads that don't have separated bike lanes?
Sure. I think bikes should be allowed on all roads. I would hope that cyclists would use the opportunity to use separated bike lanes where they can. That's why we're trying to build out a network that gives options to go north, south, or east, west. A more interesting question is, should bike lanes be allowed when no one's using when no one's using them? For example, and I know this is really frustrating, in the wintertime, in the middle of January, roads are completely jammed and congested, and you look down the bike lane and there's no one using it. Is that a proper use of resources?
Mm-hmm. But what do you think, Lisa?
We don't have that problem here.
But what about the heavy rains? It may not be snow. I've also lived in British Columbia, reported in British Columbia. When it rains hard.
Yeah, have you ever reported in Victoria? Because we get way less rain here than we do in Vancouver. I know what you're saying, though. Yes, absolutely. If you look at places in Europe, it's just as cold as it is in Toronto, Copenhagen, and so on. And people there, and even actually in Ottawa and Montreal, my understanding is that people are using the network during the wintertime. It's not as realistic, but I think we need to have infrastructure that gives people the option of safety all year round. Safety is not a seasonal thing.
I want to bring in a comment here. This is Dan Schmidt, who's in Winnipeg, who says that in Winnipeg, if a cyclist breaks a rule on the road, they face highway traffic fines and demerits on their driver's license. Is that something that happens in Ontario and BC? Should that be something that happens in Ontario and BC? Denzil?
So I think if it doesn't happen, it should happen. They're using a road. If they're not respecting the rules of the road or the law, there should be similar consequences as drivers have to face.
Lisa?
I don't think there's any difference. For example, if someone's caught texting on their bicycle and they're creating a safety hazard, as someone who's driving in the car and is creating a safety hazard. Lisa,
what do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. It does assume that somebody who's riding a bicycle also has a driver's license. And to go back to one of the things that the councillor said earlier, the research that I've read actually shows for the first time in history, and this is mostly U.S. research, although I think it's the same for Canada, for the first time in history, what we're starting to see is less vehicle miles traveled And that means that the millennial generation and those after them actually aren't necessarily as interested in getting a license or as in having a car. So I think we're actually going to see over time vehicle miles traveled going down, not up. So, the question may become irrelevant as people on their bikes are not always going to have driver's licenses. And again, anecdotally in Victoria, that's what I can tell you.
Well, I want to pick up there because, this debate is evidenced by the fact that we have here the mayor of Victoria and a councillor from the city of Toronto. This debate has national implications. In fact, every major community is talking about biking infrastructure, ensuring that people are safe on the roads. And I do wonder, should there be a greater role for the federal government? This is a major piece of infrastructure that we're talking about. Should the federal government be more involved in investing in this type of infrastructure? What do you think, Lisa?
Absolutely, without question. So in Halifax this year at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Conference, which is all the elected officials from across the country, we passed a resolution almost unanimously asking the federal government to create a national active transportation strategy. And there was one plank of the motion that was about doing more research before actually adopting it. And that was actually struck out by amendment because we've got enough research. We know what the issues are. We know that infrastructure creates opportunities for safety. And if you look south of the border, the Federal Department of Transportation in the U.S. has taken a very, very active role. So yes, absolutely. I think there's room for Ottawa because Ottawa is responsible for delivering things like healthcare, and active transportation over time decreases healthcare costs. So national active transportation strategy and funding from Ottawa, absolutely important.
Denzil?
I'll take any money that the federal government wants to give the City of Toronto anytime, any day, anytime. With regard to regulation, I don't think that really works. Even within the City of Toronto, one community is different from another community, and I think there has to be a recognition that solutions in Victoria are probably different than solutions in Toronto. Solutions in Don Mills are different than solutions in Cabbagetown.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you do then, though? Because, this is a bit of a national issue. And you talk about biking behavior, but how do you even police that? It's not as if you're going to take, in Toronto's example, Toronto police away from guns and gangs and have them patrol bike lanes to make sure everyone's following the rules.
Well, in terms of the law, my understanding is the Highway Traffic Act in Ontario governs many of the laws. In terms of enforcement, that falls to the local municipalities, and so I would agree with you to the extent that more resources need to be dedicated on the roadways for cyclists, motorists, and for all road users.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I'm just going to take one more look at the Facebook feed to see if we have any more questions from people at home. But at this point, I think our conversation is wrapping up, so I want to thank the two of you for your time today. Lisa Helps, the Mayor of Victoria, and Toronto City Councillor Denzil Minnan-Wong. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.